peace. You alone, O Lord, are holy. Come and fill our hearts with your peace. Alleluia.
I love hiking. It's one of my favorite things to do. And once in a while, I get out there into the wilderness and I find myself on a trail that seems to just disappear. By that, I mean it isn't marked and it hasn't been maintained, and it's like no one else has traveled this trail for months, years, maybe even decades. So the vegetation has overgrown the path. There's tree branches, there's thorn bushes, there's brush that I have to clear and cut away in order to move through. That to me is the narrow path, a small, narrow way that is hard to see, hard to follow, hard to find. So when Jesus talks about this path, that's what comes to my mind. Now, the reason I think that is the one characteristic differentiation that Jesus focuses on between the broad way and the narrow way is the traffic. This is what Jesus focuses on in distinguishing the narrow way from the broad way. The broad path is the way that a lot of people travel. The narrow way, well, not too many people find it, let alone follow it. Now, there are layers of meaning here in this teaching. And that's why we're going to spend the next couple weeks exploring what Jesus means by the narrow path. But today, I want to dig around into what I see as the paradox of the narrow path. Now, a paradox is when you hold two contradictory, irreconcilable truths together, and then when held together, they reveal a deeper hidden truth. Well, the paradox of the narrow path is that everyone's narrow path is unique to them, while simultaneously the narrow path is the same for everyone. So how, that's the paradox. And when we hold those two truths together, the narrow path is unique to each human being and the same for everyone. When we hold them together, I think a deeper hidden truth is revealed. But I want to focus on the uniqueness part of the paradox. Why do I think Jesus is hinting or suggesting that your narrow path is unique to you? Well, again, it comes back to the traffic. The thing that makes a path broad is the traffic. When a lot of people travel on a path, it naturally becomes wider. When thousands of people travel every year along a path, or every month, or every week, or every day, then that path becomes wider and soon it starts to resemble a road. The point that Jesus is making here about the narrow path is that other people can't clear the way for you. Other people can't cut through the vegetation and the tree branches and the brush and the thorn bushes. Other people can't make it wide and easier to follow for you. You have to do that for yourself. That's what the narrow path is about. I mean, think about it. Millions of people throughout history have followed the narrow path as followers of Jesus. So you would think with all that traffic, that narrow path would now be like a 4-lane highway. But it's not. It's still a narrow path today for those of us who choose to follow it. Your narrow path is unique to you. It's about blazing your own trail instead of following the path of your parents, the path of your grandparents, the path your ancestors for generations have taken. It's following your own path rather than traveling the same road as all your friends, or traveling the road that the culture around you is pointing you to. The narrow path is about clearing your own way, carving out your own path. Now, it's ironic how many churches take a broad path approach to faith formation and spiritual development. A lot of churches seem to be trying to make everyone look the same and talk the same, use the same language, and think the same way. And really, that's the broad path that Jesus talks about, the path that leads to destruction. The narrow path, well, that's a journey that you have to take for yourself, by yourself. Now, how we move forward on the narrow path is in general, in essence, the same for all of us. We move forward along the narrow path by growing. It's personal growth. That's how we travel and move forward along the path. Now, as I mentioned in last week's message, it has become clear to me that the vast majority of Jesus' teachings are about personal growth. And I'm using that term personal growth intentionally. In fact, I'm moving away from the term spiritual growth. And the reason for that is when people think or hear the term spiritual growth, they tend to think about things like improving one's prayer life or spending more time in the Bible or meditating more. And those are all important things. But Jesus' call to growth is all-encompassing. It includes the whole person, all aspects and dynamics of life. Jesus' teachings call us to grow in how we manage our finances, our relationships, our sexuality, social norms, conflict, work habits, how we care for creation, everything. Jesus calls us to grow in every area and dynamic of life. So the narrow path is a path of perpetual personal growth for all of us. But your narrow path is unique to you because your personal growth will look different than mine. Now, why is that? Well, before I answer that, I should back up and explain what I mean by personal growth. Personal growth simply means this: maturing. Personal growth is the movement, the progression towards maturity, or as a mature person would say, maturity. Well, what is maturity? Here's my definition. Maturity is manifesting the fullness of our potentiality and giving birth to that which we were created to bring into the world. I'll repeat that, it's kind of wordy. Maturity is manifesting or actualizing our full potentiality and giving birth to that which we were created to bring into the world. Let me use a tree as an example of what I'm talking about. A tree begins as a seed, which is perhaps the ultimate symbol of potentiality. In that seed is the potential of the large, full, mature tree. But it starts its journey towards maturity as a seed, but it has to grow. It grows into a seedling, and then into a small tree, and then into a larger tree, and finally into a full, mature tree that now is able to give birth to what it was created to produce. For instance, an apple tree was created to birth or to bear or produce apples. So a mature apple tree grows so it can bring into the world the particular fruit it was designed to create or produce. It's the same with us. Now it's interesting, one of the passages where Jesus talks about the narrow path is Luke 13. And right before Jesus talks about the narrow path, he tells this story, the parable of the barren fig tree. And in this story, Jesus says there's a man who has a fig tree. And he keeps coming year after year to see if the fig tree has grown and is producing figs. And year after year, it's not. For 3 years, there's no figs. And finally he says, I've had enough. I'm going to cut it down. It's just wasting the nutrients in the soil. So a gardener intervenes, and in this story, the gardener is Jesus. And the gardener says, wait, let's give it one more year. What I'll do is I'll disturb the soil around the tree, and then I'll put manure and compost into the soil around the tree. And that's often the only way we can grow, is when the soil around us is disturbed and life pours manure and compost into our lives. But that's another sermon. The gardener says, just give me 1 year to fertilize the tree, and let's see if it produces figs then. And if not, then we'll cut it down. Well, there's so much to this story, but to the point that I'm making here is what Jesus is talking about is growth. We are like trees. We are here to grow and bring into the world what we are intended to give birth to or create. You were created to bring a unique contribution into the world. All of us have been created to create something that the world needs, that makes the world more like the place that God intended the world to be. Now, here's what happens is many people, I hear them say this, oh, well, I'm not creative. I'm not very creative. Which is, I say poppycock to that. Everyone is creative. To be made in the image of your Creator is to be a creator. We are all creative. We just don't often understand what our creativity looks like, or we don't tend to categorize it or label it as creativity. There's many different ways to be a creator. Some of us were born to create songs or paintings or essays or quilts. Some of us were born to create laughs, joy, fun, lighthearted moments. Some of us were born to create physical objects like sheds or cabinets or furniture. Some of us were designed to create belonging, safe space, to create opportunities for others to feel heard and supported and cared for. Some of us were born to create new ways for students to learn. All of us are born creators. All of us have something unique to contribute to the world, to give birth to, that will make this world a better, richer place. So what that means is maturity is growing so that you can bring into the world that which you were designed to create or give birth to. Well, let's turn back to the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 7. That's where Jesus talks about the narrow path that we've been looking at. Now, the very next thing that Jesus talks about after introducing us to the narrow path, he says this. He starts talking about trees. And he says this in particular. He says, thorn bushes don't create grapes, and thistles don't produce figs. Now, it's easy to just skim over this, but let's think about that. You don't expect an apple tree to produce oranges, do you? Because it wasn't created or intended to produce oranges. In fact, it would be ridiculous to think that an apple tree, if it just really put its mind to it and just worked hard enough, that it could produce oranges. Yet that's how many of us live our lives. We're trying to become something we are not. We are trying to bring into this world fruit that we were never intended to create. God didn't create a fig tree to produce peaches, and God didn't create you to create what I was born to give birth to, and vice versa. Here's what I'm saying. If you want to grow, you first have to figure out what kind of tree you are. I call that your true self or your true essence. Now, most humans don't spend enough time figuring out what kind of tree they are. We just start working away trying to produce the fruit that our parents or our church or school or friends or our professor or our culture at large tells us that we should be producing. And then we wonder why we feel tired. Why am I exhausted? We wonder why there's this epidemic of anxiety and depression and feeling of meaninglessness. It makes sense that an apple tree would feel pretty exhausted and depressed and feel that life was meaningless after 20 years of trying to produce oranges and year after year failing. The narrow path is about growing and becoming more fully yourself. Now that's an interesting phrase, becoming more fully yourself. How do you become more fully yourself? Well, let's look to the trees again. How does a tree become more fully itself? Well, it starts as a seed. How does it become a full mature tree? It grows. It matures. And then it brings into the world what it was designed to create. That's how we, too, become mature, become more fully who we are. Now, I was raised in a church that tried to get everyone to be the same kind of tree. And I think some of you, maybe even many of you, have had similar church experiences. Now, it's not just the church, though, that does this. Everyone and everything around us is trying to make us into the same kind of tree. Let's be honest. Most of us are following a very similar path. Get good grades in school so we can get into a good university. So then we can get a good paying job. Then we can get married, buy a house, have kids, invest in a pension, and RESPs for the kids so they can follow the same path that we are following. Take a vacation twice a year, be thin, look good, volunteer at a charity or two, mow your lawn, post photos on social media revealing how happy you are, go to the gym, wear yoga pants everywhere you go, do a yoga pose on every vacation you go on to show how centered you are, buy more stuff from Amazon, order takeout because it's Friday night, watch some Netflix. In the words of the prophet Jim Gaffigan, it's all McDonald's. It's all McDonald's. It's all the broad path. We're all on the broad path. Even if we go to church, even if we are Christians, we are all living slightly different versions of the same life. We're all striving to produce those beautiful tropical oranges, living the American dream. And most of us are struggling. We're tired. And we wonder what the meaning of it all is. And it's no surprise. Because we're trying to produce oranges, but we are not orange trees. The narrow path is hard to find, Jesus says. And most people are not on the narrow path. Most of us, including us Christians, are following the broad path. The narrow path, it's about becoming more fully you. The unique person that God created you to be. And bringing into the world the unique contribution that you were designed to create and give birth to. Jesus isn't trying to get us to hike the narrow path because it's hard. Jesus is appealing to us, find your narrow path and follow it because it's the only way to live the life you were created for. Stop chasing the good life, the tropical orange American dream life, whatever that is. Instead, start pursuing true life.
Soft field of clover, moon shining over the valley, joining the song of the river to the great giver of the great good. And as it enfolds me can make